One sentence. The Uniform Law Commission is...
Can it be a lengthy sentence?
It's a national organization.
It's a group that shares a passion for the law.
Passion for collaboration.
Hundreds upon hundreds of volunteer attorneys.
Smart, capable, committed.
From different political persuasions.
From diverse backgrounds and fields and geographic areas that
spend 5-6 days every year with the best lawyers in the country.
Where everybody has come to the table
To really make sure that every word is thought out and
to attempt to draft well-crafted and well-conceived legislation.
The state level as opposed to having congressional action.
On specified subjects for which uniformity of law is considered to be beneficial.
To advance the general welfare of our country, the work of the Uniform Law Commission is absolutely critical to the success of our nation.
period.
A little more than 100 years after the Founding Fathers drafted the United States Constitution, 12 representatives from 7 states met in Saratoga Springs, New York,
to continue their work perfecting the Union and maintaining a healthy balance between the state and federal governments.
The organization they formed that day came to be known as the Uniform Law Commission.
Frederick Stimson, the commission's first secretary, wrote, "It is probably not too much to say
that this is the most important juristic work undertaken in the United States since the adoption of the federal Constitution." Wow, that's quite a statement, but there's much truth in that.
We have to keep in mind that the country initially was formed by various states, each of which was independent, each of which printed its own currency, each of which had its own sense of economy and sense of existence that was distinct from the others. And it just did not work.
Well, there are any number of inconsistencies between the whole states, as that had been the continuing problem for decades. A concrete example is the issue of weights and measures. The quantity of weights varied from state to state, and so if you would sell a bushel or a basket, it might mean one thing in one state and another thing in another state.
Americans in general like some consistency in their lives, and we are a very mobile society, so we move from state to state. The Uniform Laws provides a rule of law, a system of laws, which isn't changing every time you move from one state to the other. So you get the consistency and you get the uniformity.
We need uniformity, but we also need to give a lot of respect to federalism and to the rights of the states to not be preempted by the federal government unless it's absolutely necessary.
The Uniform Law Commission, I think, has been important historically because it has represented a force that creates attention on constitutional grounds as to what the federal government can do or should do in the areas that the states traditionally have had supremacy, private law matters principally.
Most Americans are totally unaware of how complex our legal system is. And the reason it has worked fairly well, I think, is due in large measure to the existence and work of the Uniform Law Commission.
Fundamentally, it's a four-step process. We research and study whether there's a need for a law. Number two, we do our best to bring in all the input and to draft the best law we can. Third, we bring it to the legislatures around the United States, educate them, answer their questions, and promote the enactment. And finally, we monitor, after it's been enacted, how is it working, and if it needs to be revised, then we start the process again.
Well, the Uniform Law Commission and its Uniform Acts affects Americans in every possible way. It affects them when they purchase a good or a product, when they purchase real estate. It affects them when they have family issues of marriage and divorce. It affects them with respect to child custody. At their death, it affects the transfer of their property at that point. And so in a variety of ways, all of us are impacted by the uniform acts that are developed by the Uniform Law Commission.
The Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. In our country, we don't take organs or tissues from deceased people. It's always something that the person has willed. And that whole structure, the whole idea that this is a gift, came out of the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act.
It was one of the most exciting things that we did because the donation of an organ transforms the quality of the life of so many people in America.
It's looked at as a model in virtually every country. It was the first. It could have very well gone the other way. It could have very well been that we would have a market in a human kidney as if it were a medical device. The reason it didn't go that way was the Uniform Law Commissioners.
It's an overarching ideal in terms of how legislation should be. We're trying to get the best possible, the wisest, if you will, type of legislation that works seamlessly for a large number of people.
And it could be very difficult, duplicative, and costly without the existence of uniform acts passed by the various states. And this has happened by the states voluntarily adopting suggested laws produced and worked on by the Uniform Law Commission. And it has just played a crucial role. As a former state legislator, I can tell you from my own experience how important the work of the Commission is.
Years and years ago, before I was elected to the House of Representatives in Washington, I worked in the Illinois State Senate for 14 years. Time and again, the Uniform Law Commission would produce laws that were considered by the General Assembly, both the House and the Senate. Time and again they passed, because we had confidence then, as we do now, that the work product we were given was the best.
Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. Before there was an Unclaimed Property Act, there were assets that went unclaimed.
Mostly money type of property. The upshot was that there was a windfall to businesses because there was no one to whom they had to turn over or account for the property.
Basically, under the Unclaimed Property Act, the holders of the property have to turn it over to the state.
That basically stays with the state until somebody would come forward to claim it. The state has the use of that.
But in the time since the first version of the Unclaimed Property Act was enacted in our home state, which was sometime in the mid to late 60s, the transfer to the general fund has been in excess of $140 million. So if legislators have ever asked me whether I thought our state commission carries its own weight in terms of bringing in revenue to the state, I have a ready answer. It's a pretty good return.
Another statute which has become very important is the Collaborative Law Act. That act has been particularly critical in providing our clients another alternative beside litigation or mediation or arbitration. It's a wonderful dispute resolution solution for them. One practitioner couldn't do it. It takes a host of experts. And I think what's wonderful is all of these uniform law commissioners are volunteers. So it has to be a passion for them.
The thing about the conference is that this really couldn't be created any other way without the volunteer work.
It's such a bargain for the states because they don't have to go to the expense of bringing these experts, these law professors, these judges, these lawyers who had years and years of experience to the table to explain exactly why these things are important or to vet the different issues. They can go to the Uniform Law Commission, use their act, and then just fine-tune it in the way that may be appropriate for that particular state.
Absolute windfall. We are the staff for state legislators.
The Uniform Military and Overseas Voting Act. Well, over time, it's been a dirty little secret of elections that it's just hard to get materials to people serving overseas and get them back in time for an election.
We've got people going to risk their lives for our country, and they want to exercise their right to vote.
So we were looking for a partner who could help us work in the states in particular to try to develop a solution which would be a standard solution. Because one of the other problems we identified is that with 50 states in the District of Columbia, there are 50 different sets of rules, 51 different sets of rules that these military voters all need to try to follow.
And so what we do is sometimes step into the breach when people come to Washington and they say there ought to be a solution to this problem. And the people in Washington don't actually have a consensus, or they don't really have the knowledge or the expertise to solve the problem. And so there are numerous examples where we have a very important contribution to make.
We would work with them again in a minute. They share our pragmatic, non-ideological, good government approach to solving problems. And like Pew, the Uniform Law Commission would rather get it right than get it done fast. And as it turns out, they also move pretty diligently forward.
And I think it's really important, leaving aside those uniform implications, that really good, thoughtful laws that really balance different sets of interests are passed in states, and we don't have any great process to make sure that's done beyond the Uniform Law Commission.
Our job is to try and find a piece of legislation that will address not only the interest groups, but the people who are affected by what they do. And in that sense, I like to think it's a more balanced, fairer, more useful work product than a special interest piece of legislation.
I've been involved as a partial participant for over 20 years. I have never yet seen a discussion going on couched in terms of partisan politics in that body. Now that says a lot.
The Uniform Adult Guardianship and Protective Proceedings Jurisdiction Act, which we lovingly call UAGAPSHA. The Uniform Law Commission is a great partner for AARP. Because of the Uniform Law Commission, older Americans have better laws on the books.
So what we're trying to do is make a product where everybody has come to the table, everybody's really vetted it, everybody's really thought about it, and everybody's really happy with it at the end of the day, and then it is enacted and it is followed.
The commercial code. I think the growth of commerce and business in the United States was greatly fostered by the development and enactment of the commercial code.
Think in the areas of banking and financing, how important it is to have uniform laws, because many businesses cross state lines and cross state borders. And think how impossible it would be without uniform laws governing transportation and trade and commerce among the states. It's just inconceivable to us. We can't even imagine a nation without having those uniform laws. We expect it.
Well, the crown jewel of the Uniform Law Commission is the Uniform Commercial Code. It has been adopted in every jurisdiction, and it controls commercial activity in the United States. It was jointly developed with the American Law Institute.
The Uniform Commercial Code sets the parameters of business interaction in terms of sales, contracts, effectiveness of language in commercial transactions. It is the backbone of American commerce. Uniformity is important because it leads to what? Predictability. Predictability leads to what? Certainty of business relationships.
A lot of commercial law around the world is taken out of the Uniform Commercial Code and is international law by virtue of international treaty.
The text of the code, including comments, in the one edition I'm looking at, is 2,161 pages, which is why I'm very careful to have someone who says they're an expert on every page.
There are several ways in which our influence is felt in other countries. Part of it is through actual collaboration and interaction.
It gives us a basis to work with the Congress. It also gives other countries a certain sense of security in that if it has been threshed out and it works for 50-plus jurisdictions in the United States, plus their relationship with the federal government side in some of the uniform laws, then it's almost like it's gone through a laboratory. And we often express it that way when we use the products of the Uniform Law Conference internationally.
Well, we are working at making our relationship with the State Department sort of a more formalized, coordinated relationship. We're working at becoming involved in their negotiations early because we are the people who have the expertise on these state law areas that they're dealing with. And I think that's going to be a benefit for everyone.
First of all, we're all lawyers. All commissioners have their own careers, whether they're law professors, whatever. And many times they may be supporting something that's not in the best interest of a particular client they may have, or their organization, if they work for a major corporation. They leave those at the doorstep and they work for the betterment of the law.
I think it's an honor because you have to be appointed by someone in the legislative branch.
President Woodrow Wilson was a commissioner.
More recently, on the Supreme Court, Justice David Souter. And former Chief Justice William Rehnquist was a commissioner.
I think what attracts the commissioners to the Uniform Law Commission is the intellectually stimulating aspect of working on these various and important pieces of legislation. They're just interesting, and every project's different, so we don't want to get paid. It wouldn't be as much fun.
There is this curious attraction to it, you know, and you really, really get into it.
Oh, I've been a commissioner forever. I've been a commissioner for 30 years.
35 years.
17 years.
32 years.
I am right at the 16-and-a-half-year mark.
For 4 years.
I am now in my 42nd year.
Well over 30 years at this point.
10 years.
For about 10 years, something like that.
Been a commissioner for 21 years. I had hair in those days.
But you have one thing in your life that you're really proud of. This is it.
We really try to strike a balance. Should there be complete uniformity? No. If there would be complete uniformity, we can just eliminate the state boundaries and just call it one single unitary nation. But we started with the premise that this is not temporary, but these boundaries are permanent. We are a collection of states.
And what is remarkable is that after all these years as a nation with separate states, we have functioned fairly well. And I attribute a great deal of that success to the work of the Uniform Law Commission.